The observatory perched on the edge of the world, a solitary sentinel gazing into the infinite abyss of the cosmos. Its glass dome, frosted with the icy breath of the high-altitude night, reflected the cold gleam of a billion stars. Inside, Dr. Evelyn Carter sat hunched over her console, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony. The hum of the supercomputer filled the room, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. The data streamed across her screen in cascading waves of numbers and graphs, a river of information flowing from the depths of space. But tonight, the river was dry. The cosmos was silent. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her sharp blue eyes narrowing as she stared at the blank screen. The silence was deafening. For decades, humanity had cast its nets into the cosmic ocean, listening for the faintest whisper of another civilization. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, had scanned the heavens with ever more sensitive instruments, hoping to catch a signal, a beacon, a cry for help, or even a declaration of war. But the universe had answered with nothing but silence. It was as if the stars themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something, or someone, to break the stillness. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. The observatory was her sanctuary, her temple. But tonight, it felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on her, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on her chest. She walked to the edge of the dome, her boots clicking against the metal grating, and gazed out at the night sky. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light, its countless stars shimmering with a cold, indifferent beauty. Somewhere out there, she thought, there must be life. Intelligent life. Civilizations that had risen and fallen, empires that had spanned galaxies, beings that had looked up at their own night skies and wondered if they were alone. But if they were out there, why were they silent? The question gnawed at her, a relentless itch in the back of her mind. She had spent her life chasing the answer, devouring every theory, every hypothesis, every scrap of data. The Fermi paradox loomed large in her thoughts. If the universe was so vast, so ancient, so teeming with potential, where was everyone? The Drake equation suggested that there should be thousands, if not millions, of intelligent civilizations scattered across the cosmos, and yet the silence was unbroken. Evelyn turned away from the window and began to pace, her mind racing. The dark forest theory had been haunting her thoughts lately, a specter that refused to be ignored. It was a chilling idea, born of the cold logic of survival. The universe, it suggested, was not a friendly place. It was a dark forest, vast and impenetrable, where every civilization was a hunter, stalking through the shadows, wary of the others. To reveal oneself was to invite destruction. The only way to survive was to stay hidden, to remain silent, to never draw attention. Was that why the cosmos was silent? Were the stars hiding from each other, their civilizations cloaked in secrecy, their signals deliberately muted? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. If the dark forest theory was true, then humanity's efforts to reach out, to announce its presence to the universe, might be the gravest mistake it could make. She stopped pacing and stared at the console, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The data from the Deep Space Listening Array was still streaming in, a torrent of zeros and ones that represented the faint whispers of the universe. But there was something there. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. A pattern, a rhythm, a signal buried in the noise. She had seen it before, fleeting and elusive, like a shadow moving at the edge of her vision. But every time she tried to focus on it, it slipped away, dissolving into the static. Evelyn sat down again, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She filtered the data, isolating the frequencies, amplifying the signal. The screen flickered, the numbers shifting and rearranging themselves into a new configuration. And then, there it was. A pattern, a sequence, a signal. Her breath caught in her throat. The signal was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A series of pulses, regular and precise, repeating at intervals that defied natural explanation. It was not random, it was not noise, it was a message. Her heart pounded in her chest as she leaned closer to the screen, her eyes scanning the data. The signal was coming from deep space, from a region of the galaxy that had been thought to be empty, devoid of any stars or planets. But there it was, a beacon in the darkness, a voice in the silence. Evelyn's mind raced. Could this be it? The first contact, the moment humanity had been waiting for? Or was it something else? Something far more sinister? The dark forest theory loomed large in her thoughts, a shadow that refused to be dispelled. If the universe was a dark forest, then this signal was a light, a fire burning in the shadows, and fires attracted hunters. She reached for the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number. It rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice answered. "Marcus," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I need you to come to the observatory, now." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Dr. Marcus Reed's voice, sharp and skeptical, cut through the silence. "Evelyn, it's 3 in the morning, what's going on?" "I've found something," she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Something big. I think it might be a signal." There was another pause, longer this time, and then Marcus sighed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Evelyn hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The signal was still there, pulsing on the screen, a heartbeat in the void. She felt a strange mix of excitement and dread, a thrill of discovery tempered by the weight of responsibility. If this was indeed a signal from an alien civilization, then humanity was standing on the precipice of a new era. But if the dark forest theory was true, then that precipice might be the edge of an abyss. She glanced at the clock. 20 minutes. She had 20 minutes to prepare, to gather her thoughts, to steel herself for what was to come. But as she sat there staring at the signal, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, something vast and ancient and infinitely patient. The universe was no longer silent, it had spoken, and now it was waiting. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. Evelyn's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic jumble of theories and possibilities. She thought of the Drake equation, of the Fermi paradox, of the dark forest theory. She thought of the countless civilizations that might be out there, hiding in the shadows, watching and waiting. And she thought of humanity, fragile and vulnerable, standing on the brink of discovery or destruction. Finally, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Evelyn turned to see Marcus Reed striding into the observatory, his coat billowing behind him like a cape. His sharp features were etched with concern, his dark eyes scanning the room with a practiced efficiency. He was a man of science, a skeptic by nature, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of curiosity in his gaze. "What have you got?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Evelyn gestured to the screen. "Take a look." Marcus leaned over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he studied the data. For a long moment he was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he straightened up, his face pale. This can't be right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's too regular, too precise, it's artificial." Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I know." Marcus turned to her, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. "Do you realize what this means?" "I do," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "It means we're not alone." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The silence of the cosmos had been broken, and the universe was no longer a dark and empty void. It was a forest, vast and ancient, filled with shadows and secrets, and somewhere, deep within those shadows, something was watching. Evelyn and Marcus stood there side by side, staring at the signal on the screen. It was a beacon, a light in the darkness, but whether it was a guiding star or a warning they could not yet say. The universe had spoken, and now it was up to them to decipher its message. But as they worked, a thought lingered in the back of Evelyn's mind, a whisper of doubt that refused to be silenced. The dark forest theory was just that, a theory. But what if it was true? What if the signal was not a greeting, but a lure? What if the universe was not a place of wonder and discovery, but a battlefield where the only rule was survival? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. But as the hours passed and the signal grew stronger, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest was dark, and the hunters were many. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, something was stirring. The night was alive with tension, a palpable electricity that crackled in the air like the prelude to a storm. Agent Daniel Harper stood at the edge of the Global Space Defense Agency's command center, his sharp gaze scanning the room with the precision of a predator. The walls were lined with screens, each one displaying a torrent of data, satellite feeds, deep space telemetry, and the faint pulsing signal that had set the entire agency on edge. The signal. It was everywhere now, a ghostly whisper that had infiltrated every corner of their operations. It was no longer just a curiosity, it was a threat. Daniel's mind raced as he absorbed the chaos around him. The signal had been detected 3 days ago, and since then the world had been holding its breath. Governments were scrambling, scientists were theorizing, and the public was teetering on the edge of panic. The signal was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was precise, deliberate, and utterly alien, and it was getting stronger. He turned to the console behind him where Dr. Evelyn Carter and Dr. Marcus Reed were hunched over a bank of monitors, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of the screens. Evelyn's fingers flew across the keyboard, her movements sharp and urgent, while Marcus muttered under his breath, his eyes darting between the data streams. They were the best in their fields, the brightest minds humanity had to offer, but even they seemed out of their depth. "What's the latest?" Daniel asked, his voice cutting through the hum of the machines. Evelyn didn't look up. "The signal's origin point is still unclear, but it's definitely artificial. The patterns are too consistent to be natural. And it's not just a message, it's a beacon." "A beacon?" Daniel repeated, his brow furrowing. "For what?" "We don't know," Marcus interjected, his voice tense. "But it's not just broadcasting into the void. It's targeting specific regions of space. And it's changing." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Changing how?" Evelyn finally looked up, her blue eyes blazing with a mix of excitement and dread. "It's adapting. The signal is evolving, responding to our attempts to analyze it. It's like it's alive." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Daniel felt a chill crawl down his spine. A living signal. The idea was absurd, impossible, and yet here it was, staring them in the face. He turned to the main screen, where the signal's waveform pulsed rhythmically, a heartbeat in the void. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic, and deeply unsettling. "We need to find out where it's coming from," Daniel said, his voice low and urgent. "If this is a beacon, then someone or something is sending it, and if they're targeting specific regions, they have a purpose. We need to know what that purpose is." Evelyn nodded, her expression grim. "We're working on it, but the signal's origin is buried in layers of interference. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack the size of a galaxy." Daniel clenched his fists, his mind racing. Time was running out. The signal was growing stronger, more insistent, and with each passing hour, the sense of unease in the command center grew. He could feel it in the air, in the way the technicians moved with nervous energy, in the hushed whispers that filled the room. They were all waiting for something, though none of them could say what. "What about the artifact?" Daniel asked suddenly, turning to Marcus. "Any progress?" Marcus hesitated, his eyes flicking to Evelyn before he answered. "We've managed to decrypt part of the message. It's not good." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Show me." Marcus led him to a smaller console where a series of symbols and diagrams were displayed on the screen. The artifact had been discovered weeks ago, buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice. It was ancient, its surface etched with strange, otherworldly markings that defied translation. But now, with the signal's arrival, the markings had begun to make a twisted kind of sense. "This," Marcus said, pointing to a cluster of symbols, "is a warning. It's fragmented, but the gist is clear. The universe is a dangerous place. Civilizations that reveal themselves don't survive." Daniel stared at the symbols, his mind reeling. The dark forest theory. It had been a fringe idea, a philosophical musing, but now it was staring them in the face, etched in stone by an alien hand. The universe wasn't silent because it was empty. It was silent because it was hiding. "And this," Marcus continued, pointing to another set of symbols, "is a map, or at least part of one. It points to a region of space, but we don't have the full coordinates yet." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "The same region the signal is targeting?" Marcus nodded. "We think so, but without the full map, we can't be sure." Daniel turned away, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The pieces were coming together, but the picture they formed was anything but comforting. The signal, the artifact, the warning. It was all connected, and if the dark forest theory was true, then humanity was standing on the edge of a precipice, one wrong step away from annihilation. "We need to find the rest of the map," Daniel said, his voice firm. "If the artifact is pointing us to the signal's origin, then that's where we need to go. We need answers, and we need them now." Evelyn stepped forward, her expression resolute. "We're working on it, but it's not just about finding the coordinates. We need to understand what we're dealing with. If the signal is a beacon, then who, or what, is it calling?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Daniel felt a surge of frustration, but he pushed it down. Now was not the time for doubt. Now was the time for action. "Keep working," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "I'll assemble a team. If we're going to find the source of this signal, we need to be ready for anything." As he turned to leave, Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Daniel!" He looked back, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were filled with a mix of determination and fear, a reflection of the storm raging inside him. "Be careful," she said quietly. "If the dark forest theory is true, then we're not just looking for answers, we're walking into a trap." Daniel nodded, his expression grim. "I know." The command center faded into the background as Daniel strode down the corridor, his mind racing. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, a crushing burden that threatened to overwhelm him. But he couldn't afford to falter. The stakes were too high, the danger too great. The universe was no longer a place of wonder and discovery. It was a dark forest, filled with shadows and secrets. And somewhere, deep within those shadows, something was watching. He reached the briefing room and pushed open the doors, stepping into the dimly lit space. The team was already assembled, their faces tense and expectant. They were the best of the best, handpicked for their skills and their resilience, but even they couldn't hide the flicker of unease in their eyes. "Listen up," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We have a mission. The signal we've been tracking is more than just a message. It's a beacon, and it's pointing us to a specific region of space. Our job is to find out what's there and what it means for us." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was silent, the weight of the task ahead hanging heavy in the air. "This isn't just about exploration," Daniel continued, his voice low and urgent. "This is about survival. If the dark forest theory is true, then we're not alone in the universe, and the things out there, they're not friendly. We need to be ready for anything." The team nodded, their expressions hardening with resolve. They understood the stakes. They knew what was at risk. "We leave in 12 hours, Daniel said, his voice firm. "Be ready." As the team dispersed, Daniel stood alone in the briefing room, his mind racing. The signal was still there, pulsing in the back of his thoughts, a constant reminder of the unknown. The universe was vast and ancient, filled with mysteries that defied comprehension, and somewhere deep within the shadows, something was waiting. The forest was dark and the hunters were many. But Daniel Harper was no prey. He was a hunter, and he would find the truth, no matter the cost. The hours passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. The team worked tirelessly, their movements sharp and efficient, their focus unwavering. The ship was readied, its systems checked and rechecked, its engines humming with latent power. The artifact's partial map was loaded into the navigation system, a faint hope guiding them into the unknown. As the final countdown began, Daniel stood on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. They shimmered in the distance, cold and indifferent, their light a reminder of the vastness of the cosmos. Somewhere out there, the signal was waiting, a beacon in the darkness. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, the watchers were stirring. The forest was dark and the hunters were many, but Daniel Harper was ready. He would find the truth, no matter how deep the shadows, no matter how dark the forest. The countdown reached 0, and the ship surged forward, its engines roaring with power. The stars blurred into streaks of light as they hurtled into the void, leaving the safety of Earth behind. The signal grew stronger, its pulse a steady rhythm in the darkness, a heartbeat in the void. And as they plunged deeper into the unknown, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest was dark, and the hunters were many. But the truth was out there, waiting to be found, and Daniel Harper would not stop until he found it.